My name is Natalie Mercer. I'm 29 years old, and for a long time, I thought betrayal would arrive like a car crash. Loud, obvious, impossible to misunderstand. I thought if the man I loved ever lied to me in a way that really mattered, there would be some dramatic scene attached to it. Lipstick on a collar, a stranger's perfume, a message left open on a screen, something undeniable, something cinematic. But the truth is, the worst lies usually arrive looking ordinary. A Thursday night, a half-melted ice cube in a watered-down drink, a phone buzzing face down on a sticky bar table. That was how 3 years of my relationship ended. Not with a scream, with a text. Thursday had started like every other overlong weekday in late summer. I'd spent 10 hours at the dental practice where I managed front office operations, smiling at angry insurance calls, rescheduling patients who swore they'd never missed an appointment in their lives, and pretending I wasn't exhausted by lunch. By 6:30, my cheeks hurt from being pleasant. So when Emily texted and asked if I wanted to meet at Doyle's for one drink, I said yes before I could talk myself out of it. Doyle's was the kind of neighborhood bar that never tried too hard. Dark wood, low lights, too much noise in one corner, not enough in another. A place where people went to loosen the knot in their shoulders and complain about work over cheap cocktails. Emily was already there when I arrived, perched on a stool with one leg crossed over the other, her dark blazer still on, her lipstick still perfect in a way that felt personally offensive after the day I'd had. "Rough one?" she asked the second she saw my face. "You ever want to fake your own disappearance over a pre-authorization form?" I asked. She snorted. "Only daily." I smiled despite myself and slid into the booth beside her. A couple of her coworkers from the startup she'd joined a few months earlier were there too, along with my friend Marcus from high school, who seemed to know half the city by now. It was easy, comfortable, the kind of night I used to believe was proof my life was stable. Not glamorous, not exciting, stable. And I loved stable. Because stable meant the mortgage payment cleared. Stable meant my car worked. Stable meant my boyfriend, Logan, would eventually figure out his creative transition phase and stop calling unpaid brainstorming sessions work. At least that's what I'd been telling myself. Logan and I had been together just under 3 years. For the last 14 months, he'd been living in my condo in West Midtown. Not officially, of course. His name wasn't on anything. Not the mortgage, not the utilities, not the HOA paperwork. But his shoes were by the front door, his shampoo was in my shower, and his coffee order had become part of my grocery budget, so in every practical sense, he lived there. He told people he was building a freelance branding business, which sounded impressive until you realized it mostly meant designing mood boards for friends of friends, having long coffee meetings that never turned into invoices, and talking about big momentum that never seemed to produce actual money. Still, I'd tried to be supportive. That's the humiliating part in hindsight. How kind you can be to someone while they're quietly deciding how much of your trust they can spend. Logan had texted me around 5 that evening to say he might be off the grid for a while because he had a late meeting and then might crash at Emily's place afterwards since it was closer than coming back across town. The message had felt slightly odd even then. Not alarming, just placed, like a sentence written by someone who wanted the details to sound natural. I hadn't questioned it. Why would I? Emily and Logan knew each other through me. Not especially well, but well enough that it wouldn't have sounded impossible if I hadn't thought about it too hard. And I had become very skilled at not thinking too hard. Around 9:15, Marcus was in the middle of a rant about a man in accounting who had accidentally replied all to a resignation email when Emily suddenly leaned closer and said, "Don't look too fast." I frowned. What? But she wasn't looking at me anymore. She was looking over my shoulder. Slowly I turned. And there he was. Logan, across the room, maybe 20 feet away. He was standing near the far end of the bar with one elbow resting against the counter, wearing the charcoal button-down I liked on him because it made his shoulders look broader than they were. He looked relaxed. Too relaxed. He was laughing at something a blonde woman said, and even from that distance I could see the ease in his face. No tension, no rush, no sign that he was on his way to anyone's apartment except the one where he happened to be enjoying himself. For a second, my brain didn't process it. It simply refused. Because the mind is strange when it meets information it doesn't want. It stalls. It bargains. It says, maybe you're mistaken. Maybe it only looks like him. Maybe there's an explanation. Maybe. My phone buzzed against the table. I looked down. Logan, staying at Emily's tonight. Don't wait up. Love you. I read it once. Then again. Then I lifted my eyes to Emily, who was already staring at me because she knew. Somehow, before I even handed her the phone, she knew. I passed it over. Her face changed so fast it almost would have been funny in another life. Confusion first, then recognition, then outrage, sharp and immediate. "What the hell?" she whispered. Her voice had none of its usual polish in it, just disbelief. "I take it he is not," I said, and I was surprised by how calm I sounded. "Staying at your place tonight." Emily looked almost insulted on my behalf. "Natalie, I haven't seen that man in over a month." Marcus leaned in. "What happened?" Emily handed him the phone without looking away from me. "Logan just texted her that he's at my place." Marcus read it, then looked across the room, then back at me. "Oh." That was all he said. "Oh." As if a single syllable could contain the humiliation of watching the person you sleep beside lie to you while standing in the same room. I should tell you, I didn't feel heartbreak first. I felt cold. Not numb, not exactly. More like something inside me had gone still, so the rest of me could survive the next 10 minutes. I looked back at Logan. He still hadn't seen me. He was smiling now, head tipped back slightly, the blonde woman's hand resting for a second too long on his wrist. Something old and private inside me, something that had been collecting scraps for months, finally stood up. The late-night showers when he came home smelling like cologne he didn't own. The way he had started putting his phone face down. The sudden privacy around client calls. The practiced sigh whenever I asked a simple question and he wanted me to feel unreasonable for asking it. I had known. Not the details, but the shape of it. Women always get accused of being suspicious when, more often than not, we're simply paying attention. Emily touched my arm. "Nat." I took the phone back. "What are you going to do?" Marcus asked. I stared at Logan's message for one more beat, then typed carefully. No shaking hands, no dramatic paragraph, no accusation. Just 5 words. "Tell Emily I said hi." I hit send. Then I locked my phone and placed it face down on the table. Emily let out a breath that sounded like she'd been holding it for my sake. That was evil. "No," I said quietly, still watching him across the room. That was accurate. For 3 full seconds, nothing happened. Then Logan pulled out his phone. I watched the exact moment he read my message. He froze. Not in a theatrical way, in a tiny way. A fracture only someone looking for it would notice. His smile disappeared first. Then his eyes shifted, scanning. The room that had looked safe to him a second earlier no longer did. He looked left, right, behind him, then finally toward our corner. And there it was. Recognition. Shock. The awful, instant understanding of a lie collapsing before it even had time to stand up. I had never seen fear arrive that fast on a person's face. Emily muttered, "Wow." Logan took one step forward like he might come over, then stopped, looked at the woman beside him, said something quick. She turned, following his gaze, and I watched her expression change too. Not guilty, exactly, but deeply inconvenienced. Interesting. My phone began vibrating almost immediately. Once, twice, 3 times in a row. I didn't pick it up. Emily peered over. "He's calling?" "Mm-hmm." Marcus gave a low whistle. "He is panicking." I still didn't answer. I picked up my drink instead, though I don't remember tasting it. A text came through. Then another. Then another. I finally unlocked the screen and read them in silence. "Natalie, pick up. This isn't what it looks like. Why are you here?" That one almost made me laugh. Why was I there? At a public bar in my own city, on a Thursday night, apparently interfering with his plans by existing too close to them. Emily leaned against the booth, furious now in a way that felt almost protective. "He used my name like I was some idiot prop." "That part seems to bother you the most," I said. "It should bother you too." "It does." But even then, my voice still sounded distant to my own ears, like I was listening to myself from the far end of a hallway, because the hurt hadn't arrived yet. The hurt was still getting dressed. What I had right then was clarity. And clarity is a dangerous gift when someone has been feeding you fog. The calls kept coming. By the 7th one, Marcus said, "You should at least screenshot everything." I know. So I did. Every call. Every text. I backed them up to the cloud right there at the table, methodically, while Logan stood trapped across the room in the wreckage of his own arrogance. He texted again. "Please answer." Then, Emily is making this weird. Emily actually barked out a laugh when I showed her that one. "Oh, I'm making it weird?" "No," I said, locking my screen again. "He made it weird when he borrowed your name to cheat on me." For the first time that night, I let myself look directly at the blonde woman. She wasn't blonde up close, actually, not really. Honey brown hair, expensive coat, sharp face, beautiful in a polished, curated way. She wasn't looking at Logan anymore. She was looking at the exit. That told me plenty. Not all of it, But plenty. I stood. Emily stood too. You leaving? Yes. You want me to come with you? I glanced across the room one last time. Logan had started moving toward us now, cautious, desperate, trying to decide what version of himself to put on first. The apologetic one, the indignant one, the misunderstood one. I was too tired for all of them. No, I said. If he wants to explain, he can do it tomorrow. Tonight I just want to remember exactly how his face looked when he realized I knew. I picked up my bag, slid out of the booth, and walked toward the door without once looking back at him. He called my name once, not loudly, just enough to reveal that he was scared. And for the first time in months, maybe years, I didn't stop because a man sounded afraid of losing me. Outside, the night air hit cool against my skin. My phone was still vibrating in my hand. I let it. I let every call ring out. I let every message pile up unanswered. By the time I got into my car, I already knew one thing with terrifying certainty. Whatever waited for me after that night was going to hurt. But not as much as staying with someone who thought I was too blind, too loyal, or too convenient to leave. I put my phone on the passenger seat, started the engine, and drove home through a city that suddenly looked sharper than it had that morning. As if betrayal had cleaned the glass. I barely slept that night. Not because Logan wouldn't stop calling, though he didn't. Not because my mind kept replaying the exact second his face changed when he read my text, though it did. I didn't sleep because once you see the truth clearly, your entire past starts rearranging itself around it. Moments you dismissed come back sharper. Conversations you smoothed over return with teeth. You start understanding that the lie did not begin where you caught it. That was only where it failed. By 2 a.m, I had 63 missed calls. By 3, the text had moved through panic and landed squarely in blame. Natalie, this is insane. You embarrassed me for no reason. Answer your phone. Then, 20 minutes later, please don't do this. And finally, at 3:41 a.m., the one that told me more than all the others combined. We can explain this like adults if you stop acting emotional. I stared at that message for a long time in the blue glow of my bedroom, one hand tucked under the pillow, the other holding my phone above my face. Acting emotional. There it was. The oldest trick in the book. Lie. Get caught. Then criticize the woman for having a reaction inconvenient to the man who lied. I set my phone down after that and rolled over, suddenly too tired even for anger. Morning came pale and unfriendly, the kind of gray light that makes everything in your apartment look more honest than you want it to. I stood in the kitchen barefoot, hair tied back, coffee brewing, wearing the oversized t-shirt I slept in whenever I was too exhausted to care what I looked like. The condo was quiet in that strange suspended way places feel after something breaks in them. I should have known Logan would come over. Men like him rarely wait to be invited into consequences. They rush in early, hoping they can get there before reality fully settles. I heard the lock turn at 8:17. For 1 second, I just stood there with my mug halfway to the counter, listening to the sound of the front door opening. Then his footsteps. Casual, familiar, as if he belonged there. As if Thursday night had been an awkward misunderstanding instead of the public collapse of everything he'd been hiding. He came into the living room carrying that same stupid confidence I had spent 3 years mistaking for charm. Logan was handsome in the soft, curated way some men are. Good bone structure, careful stubble, the kind of face that looked especially sincere when he was lying. He was wearing yesterday's charcoal shirt, sleeves rolled, jaw tight, exhaustion pulled under his eyes. Good, I thought. Let him be tired. I'd been tired for months. He stopped when he saw me in the kitchen. For half a second, neither of us spoke. Then he did exactly what I should have expected. He acted like we were two adults about to discuss a scheduling issue. Hey, he said quietly. I didn't answer. He set his keys on the counter. My counter. Then he glanced at the coffee pot like he had any right to the routine of my morning. I figured we should talk before this gets more out of hand. I let the silence sit between us until it became uncomfortable. Then I said, more out of hand than you texting me that you were spending the night at Emily's while standing in a bar with another woman? His face shifted, just slightly. Not guilt. Calculation. That's not... No, I said, cutting him off. Be careful how you finish that sentence, because unless you've developed the ability to be in two places at once, I'm very interested in hearing the version where that wasn't exactly what it was. He exhaled through his nose and dragged a hand through his hair, a gesture I used to think meant stress. I knew better now. It meant performance. He needed a second to decide which role to play. I was working, he said. I actually laughed. Not loudly. Just once. A short, disbelieving sound that seemed to irritate him more than yelling would have. At a bar. It was a client meeting. With a woman. With people, he snapped. It wasn't just her. Then why did you lie? His mouth opened. Closed. That pause told me more than anything he'd said yet. Because, he started carefully, I knew if I told you I was meeting a client late, you'd make it a thing. A thing, I repeated. You know what I mean. I do, actually. I think what you mean is that if you told me the truth, I might ask reasonable questions, and you didn't feel like answering them. That's not fair. I took my mug and leaned back against the counter, not because I needed support, but because I wanted him to see how calm I was. Calm, terrified liars. It gave them nothing to push against. What isn't fair, I said, is using Emily's name like a fake alibi and then acting like I'm the problem because I noticed. At the mention of Emily, his expression sharpened. That was interesting, too. He was angry at me, yes, but he was furious at her. She had no right to get involved, he said. I blinked slowly. She was sitting next to me. She could have de-escalated. I stared at him for a full 2 seconds, trying to decide whether he was actually that delusional or just desperate enough to sound that way. De-escalated, I repeated. Logan, you lied to me and used her as cover. She didn't escalate anything. Reality did. His jaw flexed. Then came step 2, confusion. Manufactured, offended confusion. You're twisting this into something ugly because you want to be mad. That one almost impressed me. Not because it was clever, because it was so predictably insulting. He was still trying to talk to the version of me who would doubt her own instincts just because he sounded disappointed enough. I set my coffee down. Okay, I said, let's do it your way. Where were you? I told you, meeting. With whom? A client. Name. His hesitation was tiny. Tiny enough that 6 months earlier, I might have missed it. Tessa. There it was. The woman's name felt oddly clean in the air between us, like something that had been waiting to be spoken. Tessa what? Why does that matter? Because if she's a client, she has a full name. He looked away for a second. Monroe. I folded my arms. What kind of client? Brand strategy. For what business? She's launching something. I almost smiled. Something. You're doing that thing where you make everything sound ridiculous. No, I said softly. You're doing that thing where your lies fall apart under basic follow-up questions. He stepped closer then, frustration starting to show under the polish. Why are you interrogating me like I'm on trial? Because yesterday you lied about where you were. I lied about where I was sleeping, not what I was doing. The sentence landed between us like broken glass. He seemed to realize a second too late how bad it sounded. I tilted my head. That distinction working for you? He rubbed a hand over his mouth. That came out wrong. Did it? No, Natalie, listen to me. He moved closer again, voice dropping, trying to sound intimate, reasonable. Nothing happened. That was the first direct lie of the morning, and somehow the weakest. Maybe because he said it like a line he'd practiced in the car. Maybe because men who tell the truth don't speak the way they're laying track in front of themselves. I looked at him and saw, with sudden clarity, how much of our relationship had depended on me accepting unfinished explanations, half answers, convenient vagueness, statements that only worked if I loved him enough not to press. I had loved him enough. That had been the problem. What time did your meeting end? I asked. He blinked. What? If nothing happened and this was business, what time did it end? Late. Late is not a time. I didn't look at the clock. Where did you go after? He gave a bitter laugh. Seriously? Yes, seriously. You don't get to cross-examine me in my own relationship. My own relationship, I repeated. Interesting phrasing for someone standing in my condo, eating my groceries, and apparently lying on my behalf. He recoiled just slightly at that. Good. The truth always stings most when it's phrased plainly. That's low, he said. No, I said. What's low is living in someone else's home while treating her like an obstacle to your double life. His face hardened. There, finally. There was the man underneath the charm. Because control slips fastest when sweetness stops working. You always do this, he said. You take one thing and blow it up into some character indictment. It's exhausting. One thing? Yes, one thing. One mistake. I let out a breath through my nose. Do you know what's funny? Men only call betrayal one thing when they're the ones who did it. He turned away and paced once across the living room, running both hands through his hair. I came here to fix this. No, I said. You came here to control the version of events before I had time to sit with what I saw. That's not true. Then answer something simple. He turned back. Unlock your phone. His stare went still. There it was again. That tiny pause. That flicker of panic he couldn't quite suppress. What? Unlock your phone, I repeated. Open your messages with Tessa. His expression changed immediately. Absolutely not. Why? Because I'm allowed to have privacy. Privacy, I said evenly, is not the same as secrecy. You don't get to go through my phone because you're insecure. That word didn't hurt the way he meant it to. It only made me tired. Insecure, I said. Is that what we're calling basic pattern recognition now? He took his phone out reflexively then, maybe to put it in his pocket, maybe just to make sure it was still there. The screen lit up, and I saw it. Not a full message, just a preview banner sliding across the top. Tessa, did she believe you? I didn't move. For a second, neither did he. Then he flipped the screen down so fast it was almost laughable, but too late. Too late. My voice, when it came, sounded almost gentle. Did I believe you? His face drained. Natalie. No, go ahead, I said. Tell me. Did she ask because this is new? Or because the two of you have done this before? It's not what you think. I closed my eyes for 1 second. Just one. Not because I was overwhelmed. Because I needed that second to keep from throwing the coffee mug at his head. When I opened them again, I felt different. Not angrier. Done. Just done. The kind of done that arrives quietly and then never leaves. Here's what's going to happen, I said. You're going to pack your things. Today. He stared at me. What? You heard me. You can't be serious. I've never been more serious in my life. He gave a disbelieving laugh, like I'd just made some impractical little threat we both knew I wouldn't follow through on. Natalie, come on. No. You're kicking me out over a text preview? I'm ending this because you lied to my face, used my friend as cover, and then walked in here this morning expecting me to be stupid enough to help you explain it away. He stepped toward me again, anger coming off him in waves now. I live here. No, I said, and my voice cut so cleanly through the room that even he stopped moving. You stay here. Those are not the same thing. For the first time all morning, he didn't have an answer ready. So I kept going. The condo is in my name. The utilities are in my name. The internet, the insurance, the parking space, the furniture payments from when I first moved in, mine. You have had over a year to become an actual contributing adult in this home. Instead, you treated it like a landing pad. His nostrils flared. That is unbelievably unfair. Is it? Yes, I've contributed plenty. I looked around the kitchen as if maybe his contributions were hanging invisibly in the air above us. Oh, point to them. He let out a harsh breath. I cooked. I helped around here. I supported you. That's called being in a relationship, Logan, not paying rent. His eyes narrowed. Wow. No, go ahead. Let's do the math if you want. Tell me how much you've actually put into this life you're suddenly claiming ownership of. He opened his mouth, closed it again. Because numbers are cruel that way. They require substance. His mother called 5 minutes later. Of course she did. His phone buzzed in his hand, and when he saw her name, something ugly and familiar moved through his expression. Not shame, not reluctance, but relief. Backup had arrived. He answered without asking if I wanted to be part of the conversation. Mom! I turned away, already exhausted, but his voice got louder almost immediately. No, she's being insane. That made me turn back. He listened for a few seconds, then held the phone out toward me. She wants to talk to you. I should have refused. I know that. But there are moments in a collapsing relationship when you take the phone simply because you want to hear how deep the delusion goes. So I took it. Natalie, Diane Pierce said, in the voice of a woman who had spent decades mistaking tone for authority, I think everyone needs to calm down. I leaned against the counter again. I'm perfectly calm. Well, Logan says you're throwing him out over a misunderstanding. I looked at him while I answered. Logan lied about where he was, used my friend as an alibi, and showed up here this morning still lying. That's not a misunderstanding. Diane made a small, dismissive sound. Young people say foolish things when they feel cornered. He wasn't cornered when he sent it. He's under pressure. I almost laughed. Is that what we're calling cheating now? Pressure? We don't know that he cheated? No, I said. We know he lied. We know another woman texted him this morning asking if I believed him. We know he has no explanation that survives one follow-up question. I'm comfortable drawing conclusions. Her tone cooled. Natalie, relationships take grace. And accountability, I said. But he doesn't seem familiar with that word. She exhaled sharply. You can't just put him out with nowhere to go. That made something in me go still again. Because there it was. Not concern over the betrayal. Not shame over his behavior. Just logistics. Comfort. Cushioning consequences. I looked at Logan, standing there in my kitchen, waiting for his mother to rescue him from adulthood, and suddenly I understood more than I ever had before. This hadn't started with me. Men like him are built slowly, by years of being softened against impact. He can go to you, I said. Silence. Then Diane said, that's not the point. It actually is exactly the point. Natalie, I'm done, I said, and handed the phone back to him. He stared at me, stunned. Not because I was being cruel. Because I wasn't playing my assigned role anymore. I wasn't smoothing. I wasn't softening. I wasn't listening longer than the lie deserved. 2 hours, I said. He scoffed. You're unbelievable. No, I said, I'm awake. He spent the next 15 minutes oscillating between outrage and persuasion. He called me heartless. He said I was humiliating him. He accused Emily of poisoning the situation, then accused me of wanting an excuse to end things, then asked if we could pause and revisit the conversation that night when I'd calmed down. Each version of him contradicted the last. It didn't matter. I didn't argue anymore. I just repeated the facts. Pack your things. Take what's yours. Leave what isn't. At one point, he disappeared into the bedroom and I heard drawers opening too hard, hangers scraping, shoes being shoved into bags with the graceless violence of someone who still thinks anger can reverse consequence. I stood in the living room and watched the morning light move across the floor. It was strange what I noticed. The framed print above the couch he'd once said was too cold. The lamp I bought before I met him. The faint scratch on the coffee table from the night we assembled it together and laughed because he put the legs on backward. Little relics of a life that had felt real while I was in it. He came back out dragging a duffel bag and one of the hard-shell suitcases I'd bought for our canceled trip to Charleston. His mouth was set in a line that suggested he wanted me to stop him, beg him to sit down, cry, negotiate. I did none of it. When he reached the door, he turned. "This is really it?" he asked. There was accusation in the question, but beneath it, something else. Disbelief, because until that moment, part of him had still believed I'd break first. That I would choose history over self-respect. That I would do what I had done before, absorb, rationalize, remain. "Yes," I said. He stared at me a second longer, then quieter. "You're going to regret doing this over one bad night." I held his gaze. And because the truth deserved to leave a mark, I said, "No, Logan. I'm going to regret how many smaller lies I forgave before this one." Something flickered across his face then. Not remorse. Recognition. He knew I was right. That was the worst part for him, I think. Not being caught. Being seen. He left without another word. The door shut behind him harder than it needed to, but not hard enough to shake the walls. Just enough to announce that he wanted the building to know he'd been wronged. I stood there in the silence afterward, staring at the closed door with my arms hanging uselessly at my sides. And for the first time since Doyle's, the hurt finally arrived. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just heavy. It moved through me slowly, settling in my chest like cold water. 3 years. 3 years of meals, routines, inside jokes, future plans, little rituals of ordinary intimacy. And beneath it, apparently, a man who thought he could lie to me in plain sight and still come home to my coffee maker the next morning. I sat down on the couch and cried then, quietly. No sobbing, no collapse. Just tears slipping down my face while the apartment held its breath around me. An hour later, he texted, "I left a few things. I'll come back tonight." I wiped my face, looked at the screen, and typed back, "No, you won't. Send a list. If it's actually yours, I'll leave it in the lobby." 3 dots appeared. Disappeared. Then, "You're being cruel." I stared at the message for a long second before setting the phone down beside me. Cruel. It's amazing how often people call a woman cruel when all she's really done is stop volunteering to be used. By noon, Emily had called twice and sent one message that simply said, "I'm with you, whatever you need." I didn't answer right away. I just sat in the quiet and looked around my condo, my actual condo, stripped suddenly of the illusion that it had been shared in equal good faith, and understood something that should have terrified me, but didn't. The place already felt different, not emptier, clearer. Like someone had opened a window in a room I didn't realize had been losing oxygen. And somewhere under the grief, under the humiliation, under the strange ache of loving someone who had mistaken your loyalty for helplessness, there was something else too. Relief. Thin at first, almost shy, but real, because the worst part was over. I knew. And once a woman knows, truly knows, the story can never go back to what it was before. The first week after Logan left felt less like a breakup and more like the aftermath of a quiet evacuation. Nothing in my condo had changed dramatically, and yet everything had. There was still a dent in the couch cushion where he used to sit with his laptop open, pretending to work while I made dinner. His sneakers were gone from the front hall, but the faint rectangle of dust they'd blocked remained on the floorboards like a chalk outline. The bathroom counter looked too clean. The bedroom closet sounded different when I opened it. It turns out absence has acoustics. You can hear it in this places a person used to occupy long before you stop expecting them there. I went to work on Monday because I didn't trust myself not to sink if I stayed home too long. I answered insurance calls. I smiled at patients. I nodded through a staff meeting about software upgrades, while my phone sat face down in my desk drawer, vibrating every 40 minutes with a new attempt from Logan to claw his way back into my attention. At first, the messages came dressed as logistics. I need my Navy duffel. It's not in the suitcase. You have my razor charger? I think one of my jackets is still there. Then, when I answered only once, send a list. I'll check. They shifted shape. You really won't even talk to me? 3 years and I get treated like a criminal? I'm trying to be civil. That word almost made me laugh. Civil. As if lying, freeloading, and then walking into my condo the next morning to rewrite the facts qualified as civilized behavior. By Wednesday, the practical requests started blending into emotional bait. I can't believe you're doing this over a misunderstanding. You're letting Emily poison everything. You know I loved you. Loved. Past tense, but not in the way he meant. Not a confession. A tool. Everything with Logan was a tool once it stopped being true. I did what I'd told myself I would do. I made a list of what was actually his, boxed it carefully, and left it with the concierge. Razor charger, Navy duffel, 2 sweatshirts, a pair of boots he forgot in the coat closet. Nothing expensive, nothing worth the ache he was attaching to it. The concierge texted me later that afternoon. Your ex picked up a box around 3. Seemed annoyed. Good, I thought. Let annoyance be the least of it. But entitlement doesn't disappear just because a key no longer works. It evolves. That Friday, I was home early, barefoot again, heating leftover pasta and trying not to think too hard about how peaceful the kitchen felt without someone else's clutter expanding across every surface, when my phone lit up with a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer. Something in me said I should. Hello? There was a pause. Then a man's voice, hesitant and overly careful, said, Natalie? Yes. My name is Ryan. I stood still, wooden spoon in hand. Okay. Another pause, longer this time. I think we should probably talk. About 3 seconds before he said the next sentence, I already knew. Not because I had psychic abilities. Because once one lie cracks open, you start recognizing the architecture of the others. Talk about what? I asked. About Logan. I lowered the heat under the pasta until the burner clicked. Interesting. Very interesting. And who are you exactly? He exhaled like a man stepping barefoot onto glass. I'm Tessa's ex. That made me lean one hand on the counter. Not because I was shocked, because suddenly the situation was becoming more pathetic than painful, and that somehow felt worse. Go on, I said. Ryan cleared his throat. I'm not calling to be dramatic. I found out some stuff this week, and your name came up. Tessa admitted she'd been seeing someone. She swore it wasn't serious. Then I found messages, and it was obviously serious enough. I looked out the kitchen window at the parking lot below, the sunset flattening itself against rows of windshields. And now you're calling me because... Because she said he told her you two were basically over, that you were controlling, that he'd only stayed because leaving would be complicated financially. I smiled without humor. Of course. There it was. The classic coward's split-screen strategy. To the woman at home, he was burdened, misunderstood, trying his best. To the woman on the side, he was trapped, neglected, practically gone already. Amazing how men create suffering for themselves and then market it as depth. When did he say that? I asked. According to her, over a month ago. I shut my eyes briefly. A month ago, Logan and I had been on my couch planning a weekend in Savannah. We never took because he said money was tight and he needed to stay local for client opportunities. A month ago, I had ordered takeout from his favorite Thai place because he said he'd had a rough day. A month ago, I was still folding his t-shirts into my dresser because there'd been no reason yet to separate mine from his. Interesting, I said. Yeah, Ryan muttered. That's one word for it. We were both quiet for a moment then, strangers connected by the same selfish man. Finally, I asked, why are you telling me this? Because I got lied to too, he said simply, and because if someone knew something that would have saved me a few weeks of feeling like an idiot, I'd want them to say it. That landed. Not theatrically, just cleanly. I respected it. Thank you, I said. Sorry, he replied, for all of it. After we hung up, I stood in my kitchen for a long time with the burner still on low and the pasta slowly congealing in the pan. I wasn't crying. I wasn't even particularly angry. I just felt that strange, hollow clarity deepen. Logan had not stumbled once. He had built a system, a whole little ecosystem of lies where he was always the central victim, always misunderstood, always one act of female cruelty away from finally being free. And the worst part? He had counted on me being too invested in our life to burn it down. He had almost been right. The next phase started with money. It always does when a man mistakes access for entitlement. On Sunday night, every streaming service on my TV demanded a login refresh at once. Netflix, Prime, music, cloud storage. Even the grocery delivery app on my phone showed a failed login attempt. Logan, apparently, had finally discovered the hidden tragedy of no longer living off someone else's subscriptions. At 8:12 the next morning, he texted, "Why did you change everything?" I stared at the message while standing at the sink brushing my teeth, foam at the corner of my mouth. Then I typed back, "Because they're mine." He replied almost immediately, "We shared those." I rinsed, wiped my mouth, and answered, "No, you used them." Then I blocked that number too. By Tuesday, the pressure outsourced itself. That evening, someone buzzed up from the lobby just as I got out of the shower. I wrapped a towel around myself, checked the camera, and immediately wished I hadn't. Logan. And beside him, his older brother, Gavin Pierce. Gavin was the polished version of Logan's family brand of male certainty. Tall, broad-shouldered, expensive watch, permanent expression of someone who believed his confidence counted as evidence. He looked like the kind of man who said things like, "Let's be rational here," right before defending something indefensible. I should have ignored the buzzer. Instead, I threw on sweatpants and a hoodie and went downstairs, not because I owed them anything, but because I wanted the pleasure of refusing them face to face. They were waiting in the lobby near the mailboxes. Logan looked tired in a less sympathetic way now. Less wounded, more worn down. His hair wasn't styled, his hoodie was wrinkled. Good again. Consequences were beginning to leave fingerprints. Gavin gave me the tight smile of a man who already considered himself the adult in the room. "Natalie." "Gavin." Logan shifted his weight. "Can we talk?" "No." His jaw tightened. "You didn't even hear what I was going to say." "I've heard enough from you for one lifetime." Gavin stepped in smoothly, hands half raised like he was managing a tense client interaction. "Let's all take a breath." "I'm breathing fine," I said. He ignored that. "Logan's in a rough spot." I looked at Logan, then back at Gavin. "I'm sure he is." "That's not funny." "I didn't say it to be." Gavin's expression cooled a degree. "Look, whatever happened between you two..." "Whatever happened," I repeated. He kept going. "The way this has been handled is getting extreme. He needs time. He needs some help getting back on his feet." There it was. Not apology. Not accountability. A funding request wrapped in moral language. I leaned one shoulder against the wall near the mailboxes and folded my arms. "Help," I said, "from me." Logan finally spoke up, desperation threading through the irritation now. "Natalie, I'm not asking for much." I looked at him steadily. That would be a first. His face flushed. Gavin shot him a warning glance, then looked back at me. "He needs a deposit for a place. Maybe a little breathing room. You let him stay with you for over a year. Clearly you cared about him." The audacity was almost elegant, as if my prior generosity had somehow matured into contractual obligation. "As a reminder," I said very calmly, "your brother lied to me, cheated on me, and expected to keep living in my home while I pretended not to notice. So no, I'm not financing his next apartment." Logan stepped forward. "You keep saying cheated like you know everything." I smiled at him then. Small, cold. "You want to compare timelines?" He stopped moving. "Good answer." Gavin's mouth flattened. "Be that as it may." "Oh no," I said. "Don't be that as it may me. Either what he did matters or it doesn't. You don't get to rush past the offense just because he's uncomfortable now." Logan gave a sharp, humorless laugh. "Uncomfortable? Natalie, I'm sleeping on my mom's couch." "That sounds like a logistics issue." His eyes flashed. "You are unbelievable." "No," I said. "I'm just not subsidizing you anymore." The lobby had gone very quiet around us. Somewhere behind the leasing office door, a printer whirred. A woman collecting packages pretended not to listen while very obviously listening. Gavin lowered his voice, as if intimacy might accomplish what reason had not. "Natalie, don't be vindictive." That word. Always that word when a woman stops offering softness to someone who weaponized it. "I'm not being vindictive," I said. "I'm being finished." Logan ran both hands over his face, then tried one last angle. "I left things there." "You got your things." "Not all of them." "Name them." He hesitated. "My kitchen stuff." I laughed outright this time. "You mean the Dutch oven my mother bought me for Christmas? The knives I saved for? The plates from Crate and Barrel you called pretentious until you needed to eat off them?" His mouth tightened. Gavin cut in again. "This doesn't have to be ugly." I looked at both of them and thought, ugly already happened. It happened when he lied without blinking. It happened when he walked into my home the next morning and expected me to negotiate with my own humiliation. What was happening now was just billing. It's not ugly, I said. It's inconvenient for him. Those are different things. Logan's composure finally slipped. You think you're so much better than me because you have your life together. I tilted my head. No, I think I have my life together because I didn't spend 3 years asking someone else to carry it for me. That hit. I saw it hit. And for one vicious second, I understood why truth is so much more effective than screaming. It doesn't leave bruises you can point to. It leaves silence. Gavin muttered, Jesus. Logan stared at me like he wanted to hate me enough for it to cancel what he knew. Then he said the one thing people say when they've run out of facts. You're cruel. There it is again, I said softly. The word men use when women start having boundaries they can't charm around. He took a step like he might keep arguing, but the concierge had appeared. Near the front desk by then. Not threatening, just attentive in the way building staff get when a conversation has crossed the line from unpleasant to potentially stupid. That seemed to sober Gavin first. He touched Logan's arm. Let's go. Logan shook him off. No, she doesn't get to act like this. I absolutely do, I said. He looked at me one last time, furious, stranded, humiliated in a way he could not convert into my fault, no matter how badly he wanted to. Then he said, You'll regret turning everyone against me. That one actually surprised me enough to make me blink. Everyone? I repeated. Logan, I haven't told anyone anything except the truth when asked. He scoffed. Emily has. Emily is answering for herself after you used her name as a shield. His face hardened. She's dead to me. The statement was so adolescent, so embarrassingly small, that I almost pitied him. Almost. Instead, I said, that seems to be happening to a lot of your relationships. Gavin physically pulled him back then, and the two of them finally left. Logan still twisted around enough to glare over his shoulder like he was exiting a courtroom drama, instead of the lobby of a condo building where he no longer lived. I waited until the doors closed behind them before I exhaled. The concierge caught my eye from across the lobby and gave the tiniest sympathetic nod. I nodded back. Then I went upstairs and locked my door. That night, Logan posted. He did not name me, because men like him prefer plausible deniability when they're publicly rewriting history. But he posted enough. A black screen. White text. Some people will pretend to love you until loving you costs them something. Below that, another slide. Being discarded when you're at your lowest teaches you everything you need to know about loyalty. I stared at it from my couch with my phone in one hand and a glass of wine in the other. Then I laughed. Because that, more than anything else, was what finally made him ridiculous instead of tragic. He had cheated. He had lied. He had freeloaded. And now he was performing abandonment like he'd been left at sea by a faithless wife in a 19th century novel. Emily texted me 2 minutes later. Oh my God, he is posting breakup poetry now. I smiled for the first time all evening. Apparently I'm a villain in sepia, I wrote back. She sent back 3 crying, laughing emojis, and then, do not engage, he wants attention. She was right, so I didn't. I watched quietly instead as the comments split into camps. People who barely knew us posted hearts and vague support. People who actually understood what happened stayed noticeably silent. And then, around 10:30, Emily commented one sentence before apparently thinking better of it and deleting it 20 minutes later. Interesting interpretation from someone who used my name as an alibi. I stared at that line for a long time. Not because I needed defending, because there is something oddly healing about watching one honest sentence puncture a carefully inflated lie. By the end of the week, a letter arrived. Not an email, not a text. A physical envelope slid under my office door by the building receptionist, my name typed across the front in that formal font people use when they want legal nonsense to feel intimidating. Inside was a demand letter from an attorney. Or rather, from a man with an office in a suburban strip mall who had apparently decided to moonlight as a fantasy novelist. The letter claimed that Logan was entitled to financial reimbursement for his meaningful contributions during our relationship. I sat at my desk and read it twice, not because it was complicated, but because I genuinely needed to confirm it was real. The total amount he demanded was $12,000. The breakdown was breathtaking. $4,000 for domestic support and household maintenance, $3,000 for career opportunity loss while prioritizing relationship stability, $2,000 for shared lifestyle contributions, and $3,000 for emotional labor and relational investment. I read that last line aloud just to hear how insane it sounded in open air. Then I laughed so hard I had to put the papers down. A coworker passing my office asked, "Everything okay?" I held up the letter and said, "My ex is trying to invoice me for being my boyfriend." She stared. I'm sorry, what? Exactly. I took photos of every page and sent them to my cousin Rachel Mercer, who had been a litigator for 7 years and possessed the exact temperament you want in a woman reading nonsense on your behalf. Brilliant, cynical, and very difficult to embarrass. She called me 14 minutes later. Natalie, she said by way of greeting, this is the dumbest thing I've read all month, and I spent Tuesday reviewing a dispute over decorative koi. I leaned back in my chair and shut the office door. So that's a no on me owing Logan $3,000 for emotional labor? Rachel laughed. Unless he was your therapist and I missed a licensing update, absolutely not. I looked at the letter again, the neat formatting somehow making it more absurd. Can he actually do anything with this? He can continue humiliating himself, she said. That part appears well underway. What do I do? I'll write a response. You don't have to. Oh, I know, she said. I want to. And suddenly, for the first time since that Thursday night at Doyle's, something inside me felt genuinely light. Because some messes are too ugly to make sense of emotionally. But legally? Legally, Logan Pierce was about to be folded into a tidy, devastating paragraph and mailed back to himself. Rachel's response went out the next morning on her firm letterhead, and I will admit this freely. Reading it was one of the most satisfying experiences of my adult life. It was elegant, precise, not one wasted word. She did not rant, she did not mock him, she did not rise to the melodrama of his invented damages. She simply dismantled the entire fantasy in language so clean it almost felt surgical. Her letter stated that Logan Pierce was owed nothing, that we had been in a romantic relationship, not an employment agreement, that any financial support or access to housing provided during that relationship had been voluntary, informal, and non-recoverable. Then she added the part that made me set the paper down and laugh into my kitchen counter. If Logan wished to pursue a financial accounting of the relationship, I was fully prepared to seek reimbursement for 18 months of market-rate housing, utilities, parking, internet access, and shared household costs. Rachel had even estimated the number, just under $41,000. I called her immediately. You're a monster, I said. Thank you, she replied. He's going to lose his mind. He already did, she said. I'm just providing documentation. That was the end of the legal nonsense. We never heard from the strip mall attorney again. No follow-up. No rebuttal. No brave second effort. Apparently, Logan's sense of justice had limits once it came with potential invoices attached. I should have known silence wouldn't mean peace. It only meant he was shifting tactics again. The first time I saw him after that was at the coffee shop across from my office building. Not inside at first. Outside. Leaning against the brick wall beside the patio tables, with both hands shoved in his coat pockets, like a man in an indie film waiting to deliver a speech he believed would ruin me. I spotted him through the glass while I was in line. For a second, my body reacted before my mind did. That sudden cold drop in the stomach. That involuntary rush of adrenaline. Not because I wanted him. Not because I missed him. Because once someone has disrupted your sense of safety, seeing them where they should not be feels like a trespass in your nervous system. I considered turning around. Instead, I stayed where I was and ordered my coffee. When I stepped outside, he straightened immediately. Natalie. I kept walking. He fell into step beside me. Can you stop for 1 minute? No. You can't avoid me forever. I stopped then, but only because that sentence irritated me enough to deserve an answer. I turned to face him on the sidewalk, coffee warm in my hand, morning wind lifting the ends of my hair. Watch me. His expression tightened. He looked thinner than he had a month earlier, less curated, less sure of himself. The life had gone slightly slack around the edges, the way it does when a person can no longer outsource the invisible labor of their stability. Good again. Not because I enjoyed suffering, because I no longer confused discomfort with injustice. We need closure, he said. I actually smiled. No, you need access. That's not fair. There's that phrase again. He glanced around, embarrassed now that a couple walking past had obviously heard enough to understand what kind of conversation this was. He lowered his voice. I'm trying to be mature. I took a sip of coffee before answering. No, Logan, you're trying to force me into another conversation so you can feel less abandoned by the consequences of your choices. His eyes flashed. You make everything sound so cold. It became cold when it became clear. He exhaled sharply and changed angles. You were my home. There was a time those words would have broken me. That morning they only made me tired. No, I said, I was your safety net. That landed hard enough to show. He looked away first, then back. Then he did what people do when truth leaves them nothing flattering to stand on. He tried to wound. You've changed. I nodded once. Yes. Like he expected an argument. Like he wanted me to deny it, so he could frame himself as the only one still sentimental enough to care. Instead, I stepped around him and continued down the block toward my office. He did not follow me that time, but I could feel his stare between my shoulder blades all the way to the lobby. The second time was at the grocery store on a Sunday. The third time was outside Doyle's. Always the same script. 1 minute. We need to talk. This isn't how adults handle things. You owe me that much. That last one was almost fascinating. The language of debt. Again and again. He had owed me honesty. He had owed me decency. He had owed me the minimum dignity of not using my closest friend's name as camouflage while he stood in a bar with another woman. But somehow in his mind, I was the debtor, because I had stopped absorbing the damage quietly. Around that same time, something unexpected happened. Something small. Something good. I met Evan Brooks at a Thursday networking mixer. My office manager made me attend because one of our dentists was trying to expand referral relationships, and apparently that required us all to eat miniature crab cakes under exposed brick lighting while pretending to enjoy ourselves. Evan was there representing a software company that handled operations systems for medical offices. He had kind eyes, a dry sense of humor, and the rare ability to ask a question and actually listen to the answer. He was not flashy, not overpracticed, not charming in the exhausting way men like Logan are charming. He felt easy, which after everything was almost disorienting. We talked for 20 minutes about office systems, traffic, bad coffee, and the mutual indignity of networking events. He made me laugh exactly once in a way that caught me off guard, and when he asked if he could take me to dinner sometime, there was no performance in it, no hunger for advantage, just interest. I said yes. Slowly, cautiously, yes. I did not tell him everything at once. I told him enough. That I had just come out of something messy. That my ex had handled the ending badly. That I was not interested in games, ambiguity, or emotional acrobatics. He nodded and said, "That seems reasonable?" Reasonable. What a beautiful word after chaos. We went to dinner the following week at a little Italian place with terrible parking and excellent bread. Then again the next Friday. And once more after that. There was no rush to define anything. No swelling speeches, no dramatic declarations about fate, just steadiness, consideration. The quiet relief of being in the company of someone who did not make basic honesty feel like a luxury item. I did not realize Logan knew about Evan until the texts arrived. Not to me, to Evan. A Saturday afternoon, just after lunch. I was in my kitchen, rinsing strawberries when my phone buzzed with a message from him. "I think your ex found my number." A second later, screenshots came through. There were 4 messages. The first was almost polite. "Hi, you don't know me, but I thought you should be careful." The second was uglier. "Natalie isn't telling you the full story. She gets controlling fast." Then, "She threw me out with nowhere to go and tried to ruin my life." And finally, "Just thought you should know what kind of person you're dealing with." I stared at the screen until the words blurred, not because I believed them, because the level of intrusion was so shameless it briefly stole my breath. A minute later, Evan called. I answered immediately. "I'm sorry." "Why are you apologizing?" I leaned against the sink, because apparently my past has no hobbies. He laughed softly, and that softened something in me too. "Your ex seems deeply committed to making a bad impression," he said. "You don't have to deal with this." "I know," he said. "I'm choosing to." There are moments when tenderness does not look like poetry. It looks like someone staying calm when they have every reason to be put off. It looks like not punishing you for what someone else did. I closed my eyes for a second. "Thank you. Do you want me to block him?" "Yes." "Done." After we hung up, I stood alone in my kitchen, one hand on the counter, and felt the last loose thread of my patience snap. I had been ignoring Logan, avoiding escalation, walking away in public, declining to respond to his posts, his bait, his little attempts to drag me back into the gravity of his self-pity. But this was different. This was no longer about him wanting me to listen. This was him reaching for people in my life because he still believed access to me could be forced through pressure. So I sent one final text. Not long. Not emotional, just final. Do not contact me again, and do not contact anyone connected to me again. I have documented everything. Your messages, your appearances near my office and home, and now your attempt to interfere in my personal life. If this continues, I will pursue a restraining order. This is your only warning. I read it twice, then sent it. No shaking hands this time. No adrenaline. Just certainty. He did not answer. Not that day. Not the next. Not the next. Silence from Logan felt different than silence from anyone else I had ever loved. It did not feel empty. It felt earned. A week later, I met Emily for coffee. The first truly long coffee we'd had since that night at Doyle's. She looked less furious now and more tired in the way people do when they've recently stepped out of someone else's disaster zone. We sat by the front window of a cafe on Peachtree, sunlight slanting across the little round table between us, our drinks cooling, while the city moved beyond the glass like nothing monumental had ever happened inside either of us. How bad was it? I asked. She knew what I meant. The aftermath. His calls. His anger over her not covering for him. Her expression tightened. 31 calls the first week. I blinked. Seriously? Emily nodded. Some of them back to back. He kept saying I betrayed him, like I'd broken some sacred code by not helping him lie better. That sounds like him. She stirred her iced coffee slowly. He was weird about Tessa long before that night. I looked up. You knew? Not knew, she said carefully. Suspected. He brought her up too often for someone who claimed she was just a client. Then, if I asked anything normal, he got defensive immediately. That tracked. Men tell on themselves most clearly in the speed of their defensiveness. Emily glanced at me over the rim of her glass. I should have said something sooner. No, I should have. You didn't know enough. I knew enough to know something felt off. I sat with that for a second, then shook my head. It wouldn't have mattered, I said quietly. Not then. I wasn't ready to hear it until I saw it myself. That was the truth. Painful, but clean. Sometimes the people who love you can feel the crack in a wall long before you acknowledge the house is failing. But until you hear the beam split with your own ears, you still call it weather. Emily sighed. He really thought you'd never leave. I let out a humorless laugh. Apparently. She told me that, by the way. I looked up sharply. Who? Tessa. That surprised me. Emily saw my expression and nodded once. She messaged me after everything blew up, not to apologize, more to defend herself. Said he'd told her you were basically checked out, that you two were living like roommates, that the relationship was over in every way except paperwork. I stared at my cup. Of course he had. That particular male mythology again. The neglected artist trapped in a loveless arrangement, bravely seeking understanding in the arms of a new woman. Pathetic. He thought I was too settled to leave, I said finally. Too invested, too tired to start over. Emily's face softened. He mistook stability for weakness. That one stayed with me. I looked out the window at traffic crawling past the curb and thought about everything that had happened since Doyle's. The messages, the legal threat, the public posts, the sidewalk ambushes, the way he had kept trying to force contact, as if my refusal were a temporary mood he could wear down. Then I thought about my condo now. How quiet it was. How clean. How my grocery bill had somehow dropped despite inflation. How I slept through the night more often. How the air in my own home no longer felt subtly occupied by someone else's unfinished ambitions and invisible demands. It's strange what freedom looks like once you stop expecting it to be glamorous. Sometimes it looks like an uncluttered bathroom counter, a lower utility bill, a refrigerator full of food you actually chose, an evening that belongs entirely to you. When Emily left, I stayed a few minutes longer with my second cup of coffee, letting the afternoon light warm the side of my hand. And I realized something. There would be no big ending. No scene where Logan appeared at my door transformed by remorse. No apology worthy of what he'd broken. No speech dramatic enough to make the lost years feel less lost. He would probably go on telling his version. Probably go on blaming me, Emily, Tessa, his mother, bad timing, emotional pressure, anybody but himself. People like Logan rarely seek truth when narrative is easier, and that was fine. Because closure, it turned out, was not hearing him finally understand. It was no longer needing him to. That night, back home, I stood in my kitchen with the windows open and let the spring air move through the condo. The city sounded softer from 6 floors up. Traffic blurred to hush, voices to echoes, sirens to distance. I leaned against the counter and thought again about the text that had ended everything. Tell Emily I said hi. 5 words. That was all. 5 words that split a lie down the center and let the whole rotten framework collapse around it. People always say trust your instincts, as if instincts are dramatic, loud, impossible to ignore. Mine hadn't been loud. Mine had been a series of whispers, a tightening in my chest when he said he was working late, a pause too long before he answered simple questions. A phone turned over, a tenderness gone missing and replaced by impatience. I had heard the whispers. I just hadn't wanted to believe they were telling the truth. Now I did. And belief, once restored to yourself, is a beautiful thing. I turned off the kitchen light, carried my tea into the living room, and sat down in the quiet home I had almost handed over to someone who never deserved the keys. Outside, the city kept moving. Inside, everything was finally still.